Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is day 133, Saturday, July the 15th, 2017. Okay, as you know, today I was going to talk about this thing that's going on with the Democrats, the DNC, the Hillary Clinton campaign, colluding with the Ukrainian government. And of course, as you know, I was going to talk about that yesterday, but it got blown off because of new developments happening around the Donald Trump Jr. alleged, or the actual meeting that actually did happen with the female Russian lawyer and all that. So had to get caught up on all that. So I pushed this Ukrainian thing off until today. But now we have more breaking news on a very important topic, which is now going to cause me to blow it off for another day. So it looks like we will not get to the Ukrainian issue until tomorrow. But you won't be disappointed because I've got some real good information for you today. Unbelievable. As you know, I ended my last video telling you that I had this feeling in my gut that John McCain is a lot more involved in everything that's going on than what we know. Other than him being the guy who brought the dossier to Comey and all that, there's a lot more going on there. And so today there's some breaking news that I'm going to go through for you, which kind of buttresses that point. And I think that this is going to open up a scab, if you will, and cause us to look even deeper into John McCain. I believe before this entire thing is over with, we're going to see Mr. McCain sitting on at a witness stand under oath, answering questions. And I think you'll see what I mean in just a moment. But before I get to that, two things. Number one, first of all, I want to say thank you to Dave. Thank you, Dave, for pointing out yesterday was not Friday the 13th. It was actually the 14th. You see, I do these videos through the week the night before, late in the evening the night before, or sometimes in the very early morning hours after midnight. At that particular video, I was looking at my calendar there, and I was on the wrong day, which I do all the time, don't I? So anyway, Dave, you were right. Friday was the 14th, Bastille Day. That's right, Friday was the 14th Bastille Day, not the 13th. So we didn't have anything to be superstitious about anyway, even if I was suspicious, which I'm not. So thank you, Dave, for correcting me on that. I very much appreciate it. The next thing I want to talk about, just a quick breaking news story. It appears that the Haitian official who was set to testify on the Clinton Foundation has committed suicide. Tuesday, July the 18th, is when the hearings were scheduled, but apparently it appears that this individual is no longer going to be able to testify because apparently he, at about 17 minutes after midnight, shot himself in the head in a Miami hotel. He was going to be appearing at an ethics and anti-corruption hearing on the Clinton Foundation. He was 50 years old, and he was found shot in the head at a Miami, Florida hotel. His name, Klaus Eberwein. Mr. Eberwein was the Director General of Economic Development in Haiti from 2012 to 2015. Once he came into office, he had realized that all that money that was appropriated to Haiti through charitable contributions, which all flowed through the Clinton Foundation, did not arrive to Haiti. In fact, after studying this and putting together all his documentation, he found that only less than 1% of the total money raised actually went to organizations who are providing earthquake relief. $5.4 billion, 89% of the money went to the Clintons and their cronies. So, Mr. Eberwein had put together all his documentation, and he was going to be appearing at this hearing on Tuesday, July 18th, for the purpose of laying out the case against the Clinton Foundation for fraud. But that's not going to happen now because Mr. Eberwein, who was in Miami to conduct a series of business meetings with some of his partners in some restaurant chains that he owns, and they were preparing to lay out some plans to open several new restaurants in the area, and that's why he was in Miami. But apparently, I guess the Clintons, found out he was in Miami, and they had that problem. It appears they had that problem taken care of because Mr. Eberwein put a gun to his head. Not really sure why he did it. They're talking to people, and they said he was in very good spirits. He was in town for a meeting to talk about the expansion of his restaurant chain. He was all excited about that and was fully prepared and looking forward to testifying in the anti-corruption hearings back in Haiti on Tuesday. But he's not going to make it to the hearings because, like so many other people that are looking to testify or bring evidence against the Clintons or the Clinton Foundation, end up committing suicide. And that appears that is what happened to Mr. Eberwein. Apparently he shot himself in the head. He will not be able to testify against the Clinton Foundation or the Clintons. And so that's the way she goes. Alrighty, the big news today. I don't know how many of you follow McClatchey News. I do check McClatchey News. They're actually a very good news organization. They're a small news organization, privately owned news organization. And they're really straight down the middle. I mean, they are pretty aggressive in their reporting, and they hit Republicans and as hard as they hit Democrats. I don't really know what their political persuasion is, and that's good because they do a lot of good investigative journalism there. I do know that they're no big fans of Trump. I know they were no big fans of Bush. They're pretty much a straight down the middle, small, privately owned news organization. They do a pretty good job. Now, it appears that they've been following these lawsuits by Alexei Gubarev. Now, perhaps some of you remember from watching my video from about 2 months ago where I was explaining to you that that the civil court hearings may reveal much, much more about what all went on with the dossier and all that kind of stuff and the release to BuzzFeed and all that, because it's actually a civil court where you have a judge and a jury. It's not, congressional hearings. It's not happening in D.C. or anything like that. Now, there's 2 lawsuits, one in the UK because that's where Christoper Steele resides, and one in the U.S. because that's where BuzzFeed resides. Now, McClatchey has gotten their hands on some documents from the lawsuit that's going on in the UK against Christoper Steele. And they found some extraordinary information for us. It appears, now keep in mind, Mr. Gubarev is suing BuzzFeed and Christoper Steele because when BuzzFeed published the dossier, it stated in the dossier that Mr. Gubarev's businesses that he owns several businesses, and they fingered him as the individual whose tech company did the actual hacking of the DNC and the DCCC, to which Mr. Gubarev says is false. He claims that he has been hurt and is suing for damages, financial damages, because his reputation and the reputation of his companies have been harmed as a result of his name coming out in that BuzzFeed story, and so he is suing both BuzzFeed here in the U.S. and Christoper Steele in the UK. Now, it appears that in the initial briefings, the attorneys for Mr. Gubarev are making some claims which are very, very intriguing. Because one of the main issues that Mr. Gubarev wants to get to the bottom of, and asking, his lawyers are asking a lot of the same questions that we are asking. His lawyers are asking a lot of the same questions that Trump and his attorney, Mr. Cohen, are asking. They have a much better chance of being answered in these civil court hearings than they do in Congress, that's for sure. And it appears from some documents that they have gotten their hands on over at McClatchey that the attorneys for Mr. Gubarev are claiming that there was only a small handful of people that had access to that full dossier. And the question that Mr. Gubarev's attorney wants to know is who leaked that dossier to BuzzFeed. And it appears that they're pointing the strongest fingers to one of 2, or really 2 individuals working together. And those 2 individuals would be John McCain and his right-hand man, David Kramer. McClatchey is claiming that that they have gained access to these court documents in the UK civil suit against Steele, and in the lawsuit, the lawyers are defending Steele point to John McCain and a former senior State Department official, that would be Mr. Kramer, as the likely source of the leak to BuzzFeed. Also, it could have been someone from Fusion GPS, but still it's a very small handful of people who could have given that document, that dossier, to BuzzFeed, because remember, very few people had the full dossier, and that's what his lawyers are pointing out, and they are pointing the strongest fingers as who would have given that information to BuzzFeed, to either being John McCain, or possibly John McCain using his right-hand man, Mr. Kramer, to actually do the dirty work and hand this off to BuzzFeed. Now keep in mind, this dossier was handed off to a number of news organizations. About a dozen had a copy of the dossier, but they refused to publish it because it was unverified. This would include McClatchey. We know why the New York Times, McClatchey, the Washington Post, and other organizations chose not to publish this, because they knew what BuzzFeed is finding out right now. It's a guaranteed lawsuit because it's a bunch of BS. BuzzFeed published it, and now they'll be facing the music in a civil court hearing. There'll be questions they will have to answer, and it appears that John McCain and Mr. Kramer are going to be called to the witness stand to testify. They'll certainly be called to the witness stand to testify in the hearings happening in the U.S., but it appears that these attorneys in the U.K. for Mr. Steele may be trying to get John McCain and Mr. Kramer to come to the U.K. to testify. Whether or not they can force them through subpoena or whatever, I do not know. But right now, it looks like John McCain and his right-hand man, Mr. Kramer, are being fingered as the guys who gave the dossier to BuzzFeed and possibly to these other news organizations as well. But we also know that Fusion GPS also disseminated copies of this information. We know that Mr. Steele personally, Mr. Steele personally admits that he briefed some of these news organizations on the dossier. But he doesn't say that he gave any of these, gave the dossier to anyone in full. Only John McCain, or to Mr. Kramer, who then gave it to John McCain. It also appears that BuzzFeed's attorneys have subpoenaed the former heads of the FBI, the CIA, and the DIA to seek information about the dossier. We'll see how that works out. Gubarev's attorneys want to put Steele under oath to find out how the accusations about XBT and Webzilla came about. XBT and Webzilla are the two of the primary companies involved, owned by Mr. Gubarev, and are the companies that are slated as having been the ones who perform the actual technical activity of the hacking, which Mr. Gubarev strongly denies. Fusion GPS state that they did brief the New York Times, the Washington Post, Yahoo News, the New Yorker, and CNN at the end of September 2016 on the dossier, but they do not admit to giving them a full copy of it. Steele also claims that he did brief the Times, the Post, and CNN. Both Steele and Simpson have been contacted by McClatchey, and both are declining to comment. Mr. Kramer has also been contacted by McClatchey. He has also declined to comment. We also have Sir Andrew Wood in a new interesting development, as he's now trying to cover his hiney. If you remember, as I went through that video about 2 months ago and told you how the dossier came about, I told you that McCain and his right-hand man, his hatchet man, Mr. Kramer, went to Halifax in Canada to this function, which is where they ran into Sir Andrew Wood. Sir Andrew Wood being the former UK ambassador to Russia. And it was there that they had the conversation, but when McCain gave his statement about it, he made it sound like he was approached by Mr. Wood and that he was given the information about the dossier. And so he sent Mr. Kramer over to the UK to meet with Mr. Steele to acquire the dossier, which he did, and he brought it back and gave it to McCain, and McCain says he went and gave it to Comey on January the 4th, 2017. But it appears now that Mr. Wood, Mr. Sir Andrew Wood, the former UK ambassador to Russia, is telling a different story. He did an interview with The Guardian, and he stated that John McCain had reached out to him. And he said that McCain and the former State Department official, which we know as David Kramer, may have had a copy in advance of their meeting. That's very interesting. That's very, very interesting. So now it looks like Mr. Andrew Wood is trying to change his tune, because McCain made it sound like at this meeting he was approached by Sir Andrew Wood, who started giving him this information. But it appears now that Sir Andrew Wood is stating, no. John McCain looked me up and was asking me about the dossier, and he wanted to get more information on it. Leading Sir Andrew Wood to believe that McCain already had information about the dossier. So this comes into direct conflict with John McCain's statement of facts. It'll be very interesting to see if Mr. Andrew Wood and John McCain both end up on the witness stand in the UK or in the US to both tell their stories, which are different, to see if we can find out who's telling the truth. I wouldn't trust either of these gentlemen as far as I could throw them. So it's just as I suspected. John McCain is a lot more to hide than what he's letting on. And it shouldn't surprise any of us. Remember, John McCain and Hillary Clinton are very close. They're very close because they're both bankrolled by the same people. They run in the same circles. McCain is a big fan of Hillary Clinton. They both are big defenders and receivers of money from the military-industrial complex. They're both deeply connected to the deep state. And if the truth was known, I can absolutely guarantee you that in the most recent election, that McCain voted for Hillary. I can just about guarantee you that. John McCain is a nasty, nasty individual, and I'm not going to go through his entire bio. It would take me a couple hours, and all of it is bad. But we'll just hit on a couple of the main points. John McCain was born August 29, 1936 in Panama. John McCain's father and his grandfather were both four-star Navy admirals. His grandfather, the most famous of the two. He commanded one of the aircraft carriers in the Pacific during World War II, a very rare appointment to have. There was only 7 aircraft carrier groups, and he was the head of one of them. John McCain's father, of course, during the Vietnam War, Korean War, was a commander of a 4-star admiral, commander of a Navy aircraft carrier group as well. Now, John McCain, of course, everyone knows, is a nasty man with a violent temper. In fact, in his own book, John McCain states that as a child, when he got angry, he would hold his breath until he passed out. He would go into mad frenzies as a result of his volcanic temper. John McCain had earned the nickname, while he was in Annapolis, as Punk and McNasty. McCain was a lousy student. He finished at the bottom of his class. In Annapolis, he finished 894 out of 899. The only people he actually beat out were people who didn't graduate. He's the only one who actually graduated of that bottom 5 of his class in Annapolis. He was a lousy student and a very bad pilot. In fact, quote from other pilots, he was a rotten pilot. Shipmates of John McCain referred to him as a screw-off, saying he was always on probation, and only because of his father and grandfather and their position in the Navy was McCain not booted out of Annapolis. McCain, here's a quote from his book. I enjoyed the off-duty time more than the flying. I drove a Corvette, dated a lot of women, spent my free hours at bars and beach parties, chased a lot of tail, hit the dog track, developed a taste for poker and dice, picked up models when I could, and when I couldn't, I screwed a stripper. John McCain crashed 5 planes as a pilot in the Navy. He crashed his first plane in training because he stalled the airplane and crashed into Corpus Christi Bay during a routine practice landing. Next, while in Spain during a routine training, McCain deviated from his flight plan and buzzed some houses, hitting a power line. He was disciplined for daredevil clowning. McCain crashed his plane once again in December 1964 after again stalling out the engine, and he bailed out at 1,000 feet, again destroying the aircraft and putting the community, the homes and below in that community in danger. Then we get the USS Forrestal. John McCain pulled a hot dog stunt called a wet start to screw with the pilot in the plane behind him who was in a Phantom F4. McCain was in his A4. And the wet start, of course, produced a large flame from the tail of the aircraft. So basically, a wet start is when you basically prime the engine with the fuel, but you don't actually start the plane. It forces a lot of fuel into the fuel lines, into the engine of the plane, and that way when you do activate start the plane, it shoots a big rooster tail of flame out of the back of the plane. This is a stunt that some hot dog idiot pilots will pull, but they usually pull it when they're like on a runway far away from other people. McCain was on an aircraft carrier with planes closely grouped in front of and behind him, and it was that large flame that basically what happened is the wet start cooked off and triggered the launch of a Zuni rocket from the F4 behind him. It hit the fuel tank of McCain's A4 Skyhawk. McCain then panicked and accidentally dropped 2 bombs onto the flight deck from his plane. This touched off a massive explosions and fire. McCain was whisked off the plane, likely for his own safety, because his fellow shipmen wanted blood. This resulted in the death of 132 dead sailors, countless wounded, major damage to the aircraft carrier, and a half a dozen planes had to be pushed overboard to keep them from blowing up and having their bombs detonate on the deck of the carrier. It was a horrible incident. You can see photos of it. Just Google it. John McCain USS Forrestal fire. Plenty of photos you can see. It was a horrific event, all touched off by McCain pulling a hot dog stunt called a wet start. That's John McCain. He would crash 5 planes total during his time in the Navy. Then John McCain, while over in Vietnam for about a week doing his bombing missions, he's hit by a SAM missile and he is knocked down. He was captured by the Viet Cong. Fortunately for him, he ejected, and this is how he was injured. Apparently he didn't pay close attention in class to understand exactly what the procedure is to safely exit the aircraft. Because he did something wrong, he ended up breaking both his arms and a knee in the process of ejecting out of the aircraft. He landed in a rice paddy. Now, through the previous week, John McCain had been doing bombing missions, dropping napalm on some villages. No telling. It's really actually a question of, did John McCain kill more communists in Vietnam, or did he kill more civilians, Navy pilots, and Navy sailors? We know he's got at least 132 dead sailors on his tally, hundreds of wounded. We know he dropped napalm on a lot of civilian villages in Vietnam, so he's had to have killed hundreds of civilians and Navy personnel. Wonder how many commies he actually killed. It's a good question. So he's hit by this SAM missile, and he's knocked down. And those people in those villages whom he'd been napalming all week long were probably on their way to the rice paddy to get Mr. McCain and rip him limb to limb. Fortunately for him, the NVA got there first, at which point he immediately let them know who he was, who his father and grandfather were, let them know that he needed medical attention, and of course that's where he got the title or the name Songbird, because he was willing to sing out loud as long as he could get some medical treatment for his injuries caused by his failed ejection out of the aircraft. McCain, of course, would have been kicked out of the Navy because of his excessive demerits, except for the fact that his mother would routinely call the commandant, remind him of who John McCain was, who his father was, who his grandfather was, and how connected they were, and that would usually get the commandant to go ahead and let McCain off the hook. John McCain was once caught with contraband, but he blamed it on another pilot, getting that pilot kicked out of the Navy. And of course, McCain was a serial adulterer, carrying on many, many extramarital affairs on his first wife, Carol, including McCain lived with his current wife, Cindy, for 9 months while still married to Carol. And then, of course, we had McCain getting caught up in the Clinton 5 scandal. He was one of the Keating 5. If you remember, Charles Keating was a man who defrauded his investors out of hundreds of millions of dollars, and he is still in prison to this day. John McCain, as well as other senators known as the McKeating 5, were caught up to their eyeballs in this scandal, having had very close communications and contact with Keating, taken lots of money from him, went to his private resort, where there were a lot of, let's say, things going down there that you generally wouldn't want to admit to, and just a lot of illegal activity. And of course, McCain and the Keating 5, and what they were in so much trouble for is they tried to intervene and obstruct the commission that was investigating Mr. Keating and his friends to try to keep their own necks off the chopping block. They did succeed, and they did suffer political harm, but they did manage to succeed in keeping themselves out of jail. But of course, Mr. Keating and his friends all went to the slammer, and Mr. Keating is still in the slammer to this day, I do believe. McCain, of course, has a long history of corruption and pay-to-play schemes. And of course, Mr. McCain has very few friends, including in the Senate, in the body where he serves. And just a few of the many things that he has done over the years in the Senate. He was once in an open session in a debate, and he turned to his Republican colleague, Charles Grassley, and called him a fucking jerk. There was another hearing which he turned on another Republican colleague, Pete Domenici, and called him an asshole. There was another hearing where he turned to another Republican colleague of his, John Cornyn, who's still in the Senate today. And John Cornyn had told McCain when he was babbling about something that he was out of line. And McCain responded to John McCornyn, "Fuck you." Thad Cochran once referred to McCain as erratic and a hothead. Of course, we all know that. So this is just a little bit about John McCain. It tells us what type of a person he is. We know that John McCain sent his right-hand man, Mr. Kramer, over to the UK to get this fraudulent document, the dossier, to give it to James Comey for the very intent and very purpose of bringing down an American president of his own party, which would have done great damage to the country, especially since it was all based on lies, but would have also done great damage to his party. You have to wonder why John McCain's colleagues, Republican colleagues, have not called him out. Why have they not forced him to step down and resign? Why does Mr. McCain have any credibility at all to even remain a U.S. Senator? Because he certainly should not. Well, it's because John McCain is a puppet of the deep state and of the military-industrial complex. He's a wonderful tool for them, and they will back him. And so everyone is afraid to go after McCain because of who he has backing him. It's not a good play. You might end up like Mr. Klaus Eberwein, committing suicide in a Miami or a Washington, D.C. hotel, or wherever you happen to reside, when you mess with people like the deep state and the Clintons and folks like that. So Mr. McCain continues to maintain his role as senator, even though he's completely senile. So this is what we now know, that John McCain is now going to be targeted as a witness, certainly in the hearings against BuzzFeed in the U.S. and possibly in the hearings against the case going on in the UK against Mr. Steele, Mr. Gubarev's attorneys, and it appears that Mr. Steele's attorneys believe that it's highly likely that Mr. McCain or his right-hand man, his hatchet man, Mr. Kramer, were responsible for leaking the full dossier to BuzzFeed. If this turns out to be true, John McCain should go to jail. Whether he will or not, I don't know. But if you remember, I told you that we should not be looking to the Congress for this thing to be aired out and for the truth to come out. There's a much greater chance that the truth will come out in a civil court hearing where you have a judge and a jury and real lawyers asking real questions, not an inside the beltway hack job political circus by the politicians who represent the deep state, who are right now in the process of trying to carry out a coup against the president. So a lot of questions that we want to have answered may be answered in these civil hearings, both in the UK and here in the US. I imagine Mr. Cohen and Mr. Trump will be watching these hearings very carefully, because Mr. McCain may have to go up there on the witness stand and say whether or not he was the one who gave the dossier to BuzzFeed. If he did, it's a whole new ball game. And if Mr. Gubarev is successful at defending himself and proving that he was not the source, the actual source of the hacks into the DNC, this could call the entire thing into question, which it already is in question. And one way to know for sure is to look at those servers. Mr. Mueller doesn't appear to have any interest in looking at the servers, or maybe he has an interest and the DNC doesn't want him to. He doesn't need to ask. He can get subpoenas and go take the servers right now. Mr. McCain, John McCain needs to be asked the following questions. John McCain, did you give the dossier in any form, directly or indirectly, to BuzzFeed? That's the question he needs to answer. BuzzFeed won't answer that question, and we already know that Fusion GPS doesn't want to answer the question. We already know from a couple days ago, 2 days ago, which several of you commented on in my previous video, that Mr. Simpson from GPS, as well as his two partners in GPS, have all been asked multiple times from various committees in the Congress to come and testify. They will not. The people who supposedly did the investigation on the server over at CrowdStrike have been asked to testify. They will not. But they may be subpoenaed in these civil suits. Now, it appears that from the attorneys representing Mr. Gubarev, they've already been approached about a settlement. I thought he might take a settlement because it's financial for Mr. Gubarev, but apparently he's a rich man and he wants his reputation restored more than he wants the money. Certainly he wants the money too, but it doesn't appear that he's interested in taking a buyout. It doesn't appear that they're going to be able to buy Mr. Gubarev out, at least not at this point. However, I would expect that the next move will be to bring some great pressure upon him. He may want to, along with his lawyers, increase security for himself and his family. If that doesn't work, then of course it will come down to the judge and the jury who will be seated, and you can expect that that judge is going to be getting a visit, some phone calls. Maybe he'll get his window busted out in his car. Maybe he'll get late night phone calls, threatening phone calls. Maybe someone will run him off the road. Maybe he'll find himself in a hotel in Miami where there'll be a firearm in the vicinity and something bad will happen to the judge. Maybe they'll get to the jury. Maybe some members of the jury will be offered some cash. Maybe some of them will be threatened with something if they don't cooperate. Remember, we're talking about the deep state here. They don't want any truth coming out of these hearings, in these civil court hearings. My guess is they'll try to do everything they can to make sure that doesn't happen. Some people may end up like Mr. Eberwein as a result of this case, so we'll have to watch closely and see how many witnesses, judges, and jurors actually survive long enough to tell the truth in this particular hearing. But yes, this is very bad news for John McCain, the fact that he may be subpoenaed to testify and tell the truth. And this is a question I've been asking for a very long time, because when you find out the answer to that question, who leaked the dossier to BuzzFeed, that is going to give you an entire chain of people that you can then go and reverse. If we find out that John McCain gave the dossier to BuzzFeed, then we know where John McCain got the dossier. Then we just follow the trail. And we can find a lot of people who would have been involved. We can find out who else John McCain shared that dossier with. My guess is Hillary Clinton got a copy. Hillary Clinton and her campaign team should have to answer that question. I wouldn't be surprised to see them subpoenaed in these civil court hearings. This civil court hearing could prove to be the thing that leads us to the most truth and most facts. Likely will not come out of the Congress or their hearings, but we'll see how that goes. So, this is what we have, my friends. My gut is telling me that McCain and the Clintons, along with key players in the Obama administration, are up to their eyeballs in this, and that GPS Fusion was doing the dirty work, along with Christoper Steele. They were doing the dirty work, and now it appears that this thing is, now that this is coming out, and these guys know that they're under possible, looking at possible criminal charges, possible jail time, fines, and things like that, that everybody is scrambling to save their neck. It's a very dangerous game that these people are playing. And they're playing with some very, very nasty people. Just ask Mr. Eberwine what happens when you attempt to bring a little truth about the deep state, the Clintons, the Obama administration, and people of their ilk. But John McCain himself is holding a lot of information that could cost a lot of people a lot of money and a lot of freedom. I'm not so sure that John McCain himself should double check the medication that he takes to make sure it's good, because John McCain may have become a liability. When you become a liability to the deep state, doesn't matter who you are, bad things can happen to you. I imagine John McCain is sweating a little bit right now. I would not want to be the middle of this shit sandwich that McCain has now become a part of. It's not a healthy place to be. It's not a safe place to be. So we're going to see what comes out of this, but this is the new breaking developments. John McCain, according to the attorneys, according to McClatchey, the attorneys in the case in the UK representing Mr. Steele are going to point the finger at John McCain as being the person who outed the dossier, because that's what Mr. Guverov's attorneys want to know. That's the person they're going to sue. That's the person they're going to come after for damages, tens of millions of dollars. That's the person they want to discredit so that Mr. Guverov can get his reputation back. It appears that Mr. Steele is not going to take the fall. Mr. Steele is saying that in his deposition, he stated that it was his understanding when he put together the dossier that it would not be made public. Now, the problem Mr. Steele has is he's already admitted that he personally briefed several news organizations on the dossier. He did not give them a copy of it as his defense. He's saying, hey, I didn't give them a copy of it. I gave them some information in general about what I had uncovered in the dossier, but I didn't give them the dossier to release to BuzzFeed or anyone else. That's how he's trying to sliver off the hook. But he needs to find someone to scapegoat, or someone he can point the finger at who maybe did give the dossier to news organizations, and especially BuzzFeed. Very interesting that Mr. Steele is pointing the finger at John McCain and not GPS Fusion. Glenn Simpson and his buddies at GPS Fusion, of course, are pretty much married to Christoper Steele in this event, so I would expect to see that they will stick together. I imagine GPS Fusion and Christoper Steele are going to try to stay on the same sheet of music together to protect themselves. They're both the people being sued in the lawsuit, and they're both the people who do not want to be prosecuted or found to be the person who disseminated the dossier to any of these news organizations, especially BuzzFeed, because they're the ones who published it. So it appears that they're looking for the person who did, and right now it appears that the attorneys for Mr. Steele are pointing to John McCain and his right-hand hatchet man, Mr. Kramer. I expect that we're going to see the same thing from GPS's lawyers. They're also going to try to point the finger at someone, and it certainly won't be Mr. Steele. So I would think that Mr. McCain or some others are going to have to answer these questions, and I expect that even though Mr. Simpson and his partners won't testify in Congress, I would be 99% sure that they are going to be subpoenaed to testify in the case against BuzzFeed here in the U.S. Whether or not they can have them extradited or bring them back to the UK, whether or not McCain has to go to the UK or whatever, I don't know. But they are right now being pointed to as the perps who leaked the dossier to BuzzFeed and possibly other news organizations. If that turns out to be true, and if we find out that John McCain and his buddy David Kramer were passing this dossier out to these media organizations, including BuzzFeed, and probably you can almost guarantee the Hillary Clinton campaign. Because again, McCain and Hillary Clinton are very good buddies, very good buddies. I would find it hard to believe that Mr. McCain and Mr. Kramer would not see to it that the dossier got into the hands of Hillary Clinton. There is some conversation in the emails between Podesta and Neera Tanden suggesting that possibly they did have some sort of information in that last week before the vote. And you can look at those emails and see that there's a conversation that's happening that suggests that they have some information. Robbie Mook went out on TV, on Fox News as a matter of fact, and other places, and even admitted that they had gotten some information about this. He didn't say the dossier, but he said about some activities that Trump was involved in with the Russians. So it appears, and even Hillary Clinton made some reference to the fact that they knew about some of this stuff. So the question is, John McCain, did he give the dossier to BuzzFeed or any news organizations, in piece or in part, or completely? Did he? In fact, just ask the question, who the hell did you give, Mr. McCain, that dossier to? Whether you gave a few sentences or whether you gave the whole dossier. Who did you and Mr. Kramer dispense that dossier to? Very important question. Could open up a whole Pandora's box and drag a whole bunch of people into this thing that are trying to get the hell out of it. So the light is being shined on the cockroaches and they are fleeing the ship. But they can run, but I don't think they can hide. They can certainly count on the Congress to cover up their crimes, but they cannot count on Mr. Gubarev's attorneys who are working for him. As far as the judge is concerned, there'll be a lot of pressure brought on him. We'll see if he can hang. As far as the jury's concerned, you can be assured that they will get some phone calls, some visits, and some harassment. It's going to take a lot of people with a lot of courage to bring forth the truth. But God willing, we'll get it. So that is today's TowerGate video. Day 133, Saturday, July the 15th. I appreciate y'all tuning in. And God willing, tomorrow, nothing else major will pop up, and I'll be able to get to that Ukrainian story because it's a big story, it's a breaking story, and it's an important story. And we need to talk about that as well. Thank you all for tuning in. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and I'll be back tomorrow night. Goodbye.